A 65-year-old man named Clifford came to me 20 months ago. He had been a logistics coordinator for 37 years. Organized, deliberate. The kind of man who had read about health, who had made changes, who had taken the advice seriously when his GP had told him 5 years earlier that his blood pressure and cholesterol needed addressing. He had given up soda completely. He was proud of that. He mentioned it to me in our first conversation, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has made a genuine sacrifice and wants it acknowledged. He had been drinking no soda for 5 years. Not one can, not one glass. He had replaced it with things he believed were categorically better, things with natural on the label, things with no added sugar on the label, things his colleagues drank at their desks and called healthy choices. His cardiologist had referred him to me because his coronary artery calcium score, measured as part of a cardiovascular risk assessment, had come back at 387. Significant calcification in 2 major coronary vessels. His triglycerides were elevated at 4.1 millimoles per liter. His HDL, his protective cholesterol, was low. His blood pressure, despite 2 antihypertensive medications, was running between 144 and 158 systolic. His HbA1c was 6.1 in the pre-diabetic range, the metabolic picture of a man whose cardiovascular risk had been quietly advancing for years despite the changes he had made and the things he had given up. When I asked him to walk me through what he drank in a typical day, he listed 5 things. A glass of orange juice for breakfast, a large coffee with flavored syrup from the cafe near his office mid-morning, an energy drink at 2 in the afternoon when his concentration dropped, a fruit smoothie he made himself from a recipe he had found in a health magazine, and in the evenings 2 to 3 glasses of wine because he had read that red wine contained antioxidants and was protective for the heart. Not one of those 5 drinks was soda. Not one of them came with the cultural association of something bad for you. All of them carried either a health label, a natural association, or a social respectability that placed them outside the category of things a health-conscious person should feel concerned about. And together, consumed in that pattern every single day, they were doing more damage to Clifford's cardiovascular system than the soda he had given up 5 years ago and never missed. I'm Dr. Kevin Adewale. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon. I spent over 30 years operating on hearts, repairing arteries, and reviewing the daily habits of patients whose cardiovascular risk continued advancing despite the changes they believed they were making. What I'm about to share with you, most doctors won't bring up at your annual checkup, but after 60, it matters more than you think. Today, I'm going to tell you about 5 drinks that are worse for your heart than soda drinks that are in most homes right now. Drinks that carry health labels or natural associations or long cultural histories. And I am going to explain exactly what each one does inside the cardiovascular system, why its damage is more significant than most people understand, and what to drink instead. Stay with me, because the 3rd drink on this list is the one that surprises people most. It sits in the health food aisle. It has fruit on the label, and it is doing something specific to triglycerides and hepatic fat that most people consuming it have never been told. Before I take you through the 5 drinks, I need you to understand something about how beverages damage the cardiovascular system that most people have never been clearly explained. Because, without this understanding, the 5 drinks I'm about to describe will seem like an arbitrary list of things being made to sound dangerous. With it, they will make complete physiological sense. Think of it this way. Your cardiovascular system is not just damaged by what it is asked to pump. It is damaged by the metabolic environment in which it operates. Every drink you consume creates a biochemical response. It changes blood glucose. It changes triglycerides. It changes inflammatory signaling. It changes vascular tone. It changes the electrical environment of the heart muscle itself. In a young, metabolically healthy body, those responses are managed quickly and efficiently. In a body over 60, where insulin sensitivity has reduced, where arterial walls have stiffened, where hepatic fat metabolism is slower, where the kidneys are less efficient at managing fluid and electrolyte balance. Those same responses are amplified, prolonged, and compounded. The same drink produces a different metabolic event in a 6-5-year-old body than it produced in a 3-5-year-old one. And that difference is not small. It is clinically significant, it is measurable, and it is consistently overlooked because the drink carries the same label in both decades. The damage that beverages cause to the cardiovascular system operates through 4 primary mechanisms: glycemic stress, rapid rises in blood glucose that trigger insulin surges, vascular inflammation, and glycation of arterial wall proteins. Hepatic triglyceride overload, specifically from fructose, which bypasses normal glucose metabolism and is converted directly to fat in the liver, raising triglycerides and contributing to hepatic steatosis that amplifies insulin resistance. Vascular inflammation, from compounds that activate inflammatory pathways in the endothelium, the inner lining of blood vessels, reducing their flexibility and promoting plaque formation. And direct cardiac toxicity, from compounds that alter the electrical properties of the cardiac cell membrane, raise blood pressure acutely, or disrupt the rhythm of the heart. Each of the 5 drinks I'm about to describe operates through at least 2 of those mechanisms simultaneously. That is what makes them specifically dangerous, and that is what the natural label, the no added sugar claim, or the antioxidant story does not tell you. The first drink is fruit juice. Any fruit juice: orange juice, apple juice, cranberry juice, pomegranate juice, grape juice, the juice sitting in most refrigerators right now, consumed most commonly at breakfast, almost universally considered the responsible alternative to a sugary drink. Here is why this is dismissed as a concern. Fruit is healthy. This is true. Whole fruit with its fiber, its cellular structure, its intact phytonutrients is genuinely beneficial for most adults and has a positive evidence base across multiple health outcomes. But here is what most people are never told. The juice is not the fruit. It is the sugars of the fruit, without the structure that made those sugars manageable. Here is what is actually happening inside the body. A standard 250 milliliters glass of orange juice contains approximately 26 grams of sugar, primarily fructose and glucose, and essentially zero fiber. The fiber that would have slowed the absorption of those sugars in the whole orange is absent. The physical cellular structure that would have required digestive effort to break down is gone. The sugars arrive in the small intestine in liquid form and enter the portal circulation within minutes. Blood glucose rises rapidly in a person with any degree of insulin resistance, which includes the majority of adults over 60 with cardiovascular risk factors. That rapid glucose rise produces a disproportionate insulin response. The insulin surge causes vasoconstriction. It promotes sodium retention. It drives inflammatory signaling in the vascular endothelium. Blood pressure rises acutely. Arterial inflammation is activated. And the fructose component, which does not raise blood glucose directly and therefore does not show on a glucose monitor, travels to the liver and is converted to triglycerides. Plasma triglycerides rise, HDL falls. The metabolic consequence of that single glass of juice is not visible on the glucose meter. It is visible on the lipid panel and on the arterial wall over months and years. Research published in the British Medical Journal found that regular consumption of fruit juice was associated with increased risk of type 2 diabetes independent of total caloric intake, a finding that was not replicated for whole fruits. Consumption, the juice and the fruit, produce different metabolic responses. The difference is the fiber, and the difference is cardiovascular. We place the juice with the whole fruit, a small orange, a handful of berries. The fiber is the protection. Without it, the fruit sugar is simply sugar at speed. The second drink is energy drinks. And I want to be specific about why energy drinks belong on this list above soda, because the cardiovascular risk of a standard can of soda is primarily glycemic. The cardiovascular risk of a standard energy drink is glycemic and direct cardiac electrophysiology simultaneously, and for a heart over 60 that may already have structural changes, that combination is not manageable in the way it is for a 2-year-old who has been drinking them since university. Here is what is actually happening inside the body. A standard 500 milliliters energy drink contains between 27 and 54 grams of sugar, comparable to soda, combined with 150 to 300 milligrams of caffeine, taurine, B vitamins in pharmacological doses. And in many formulations, guarana, which contains additional caffeine beyond what is listed. The caffeine and guarana combination blocks adenosine receptors in the cardiovascular system, adenosine being one of the body's primary vasodilatory and heart rate moderating compounds. With adenosine blocked, the sympathetic nervous system operates without one of its checks. Heart rate rises. Blood pressure rises acutely, sometimes by 10 to 15 points systolic, within 30 minutes of consumption. Coronary artery tone increases. The heart is working harder against greater resistance, delivering less blood to its own muscle. The taurine, marketed as cardioprotective, alters the calcium handling within cardiac cells in ways that are not benign in a heart with any pre-existing structural disease. And the B vitamins, niacin in particular, at the doses found in energy drinks can cause vasodilation that, combined with the caffeine-induced vasoconstriction, creates unpredictable vascular tone changes that the aging cardiovascular system is less equipped to manage. Research published in the Journal of the American Heart Association found that energy drink consumption produced greater and more prolonged QTc interval prolongation, a measure of cardiac electrical recovery time, than caffeine alone at equivalent doses, suggesting that the combination of compounds in energy drinks has cardiac electrophysiological effects beyond what the caffeine content alone would predict. QTc prolongation is associated with arrhythmia risk. In a heart over 60 with any degree of fibrotic change, any degree of prior ischemia, any degree of existing conduction delay, that is not a risk to manage with reassurance. If you are consuming energy drinks for afternoon fatigue, and Clifford was, the solution is not a different brand. It is addressing the fatigue at its source. Sleep quality, hydration, blood sugar stability across the day, a 15-minute walk in the early afternoon, those interventions address the mechanism. The energy drink masks it, while simultaneously stressing the organ that will eventually announce the price. But the next drink is where things become far more serious. And it is the one that surprises people most, because it sits in the health food aisle and has fruit on the label. The third drink is commercial fruit smoothies, not the smoothie you make at home from whole fruit, leafy greens, and water. The bottled smoothie from the refrigerated health food section of the supermarket. The one that lists 6 or 7 fruits on the label. The one that describes itself as one of your 5 a day. The one that a significant proportion of adults over 60 consume as a health intervention rather than a treat. Here is why this is dismissed as a concern. The ingredients are fruit. The label is transparent. The product markets itself as concentrated nutrition. And in a culture that has successfully communicated that fruit is healthy, a product made entirely from fruit carries an almost impenetrable defense against scrutiny. But here is what is actually happening inside the body. A standard 250 milliliters commercial fruit smoothie contains between 28 and 40 grams of sugar. The fiber content, despite the fruit, is typically low because the blending process has broken down to cellular structure of the fruit, reducing the physical resistance to digestion that makes whole fruit metabolically manageable. What remains is essentially concentrated fruit sugar in a liquid medium that is absorbed with only slightly more resistance than fruit juice. The fructose load delivered to the liver in a single bottle is substantial. Repeated daily, that fructose load drives hepatic fat accumulation, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is the most significant driver of insulin resistance in adults over 50 and which directly amplifies every cardiovascular risk factor simultaneously. The specific mechanism involves fructose overloading the liver's capacity for normal carbohydrate metabolism. Fructose is converted in the liver through a pathway that does not require insulin and has no feedback inhibition, meaning the liver cannot slow the conversion regardless of how much fructose arrives. The products of that conversion are triglycerides and uric acid. Triglycerides enter the circulation, raising plasma levels and driving the dyslipidemia pattern, high triglycerides, low HDL, that is independently associated with cardiovascular event risk. Uric acid inhibits nitric oxide production in the vascular endothelium. Nitric oxide is the primary vasodilatory compound the endothelium uses to maintain arterial flexibility. Reduce nitric oxide and the arteries stiffen. Blood pressure rises, endothelial function deteriorates. The smoothie that was supposed to be part of the cardiovascular protection strategy is driving two of the most significant mechanisms of vascular damage simultaneously. Research published in Nutrients found that matched servings of blended fruit smoothie and whole fruit produce significantly different triglyceride and glucose responses, with the smoothie producing higher and more sustained peaks despite identical fruit content, confirming that the blending process meaningfully alters the metabolic consequence of the same nutritional content. Tell me in the comments, are you drinking commercial smoothies regularly as part of what you consider a healthy routine? Because the answer to that question tells me something important about how much of what I have just described was information you already had, and how much of it changes what happens tomorrow morning. The fourth drink is one that carries one of the most durable health associations in popular nutrition culture: red wine. Specifically the daily or near-daily red wine consumption that millions of adults over 60 have adopted based on the understanding that moderate red wine consumption is cardioprotective. That understanding is based on real epidemiological observation, and it is being applied in ways that the original research did not support, and that the cardiovascular system of an adult over 60 cannot safely accommodate. Here is the history that needs to be understood. The observation that Mediterranean populations with moderate wine consumption showed lower cardiovascular event rates than Northern European populations with higher spirits consumption was real. It generated genuine research interest. The mechanism proposed, resveratrol, a polyphenol found in grape skin, with antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties that was biologically plausible. The finding that moderate alcohol consumption was associated with higher HDL cholesterol and reduced platelet aggregation was replicated in multiple observational studies. The cardioprotection story had evidence behind it. What that story consistently left out was dose, frequency, age-specific risk, and the Mendelian randomization studies that came later and produced a very different conclusion. Here is what is actually happening inside the body. Alcohol is metabolized by the liver to acetaldehyde, a directly toxic compound that damages hepatocytes, promotes hepatic inflammation, and contributes to the fatty liver disease that amplifies insulin resistance and cardiovascular risk. In a liver that is already processing the metabolic load of a person over 60 with visceral adiposity, even moderate alcohol intake adds a hepatotoxic burden that younger livers tolerate but older ones absorb at greater cost. Simultaneously, alcohol raises blood pressure. The blood pressure-raising effect of regular alcohol consumption, even at moderate doses, is one of the most consistently documented findings in cardiovascular epidemiology. 2 to 3 glasses of wine per evening, maintained across months and years, raises systolic blood pressure by a clinically significant margin. Alcohol also raises triglycerides, specifically through the same hepatic pathway as fructose, converting excess acetyl-CoA to fatty acids that enter the circulation as VLDL. And alcohol disrupts sleep architecture in ways that elevate morning cortisol, amplify the morning blood pressure surge, and reduce the cardiac repair that deep sleep enables. The Mendelian randomization studies, which use genetic variants that determine alcohol metabolism to separate the effect of alcohol from the confounding lifestyle factors that tend to accompany moderate wine consumption, have consistently shown that the apparent cardiovascular benefit of moderate alcohol disappears when confounding is removed. The people who drink moderate amounts of red wine in Mediterranean settings also eat differently, move more, sleep better, and have lower chronic stress. The wine was traveling with beneficial company. It was not doing the beneficial work. Research published in JAMA Network Open confirmed that no level of alcohol consumption was associated with a net cardiovascular benefit after controlling for confounding factors, and that even moderate regular consumption was associated with measurably elevated blood pressure and triglycerides compared to non-drinkers with similar lifestyle profiles. 2 to 3 glasses of wine per evening, which is what Clifford was consuming, delivers approximately 30 to 45 grams of alcohol per night, every night. That is not moderate by any clinical definition, and it was contributing to his elevated triglycerides, his blood pressure that was not responding to 2 antihypertensive medications, and his pre-diabetic HbA1c through the hepatic fat and insulin resistance pathways simultaneously. The 5th drink is the one that will generate the most resistance, because it is the drink most deeply embedded in daily routine, most socially ubiquitous, and most associated in popular culture with sophistication and adult life. Specialty coffee drinks, specifically the large flavored coffee beverages, the lattes, the frappuccinos, the caramel macchiatos, the oat milk drinks with flavored syrups that are consumed daily by a significant proportion of adults who gave up soda years ago and replaced it with something they believe is categorically different. Here is what is actually happening inside the body. A large flavored latte from a standard high street coffee chain contains between 35 and 65 grams of sugar, depending on the syrup and the size. It contains between 200 and 400 milligrams of caffeine, depending on the number of espresso shots, and it contains between 15 and 30 grams of fat from the milk base. That combination, rapid glycemic load, high caffeine, and fat consumed in the morning during the cortisol awakening response, when the cardiovascular system is already at its daily peak and pressure and heart rate, produces a compounded cardiovascular stressor that a plain espresso does not. The caffeine at that dose blocks adenosine, as I described with energy drinks. Blood pressure rises acutely. The sugar in the flavored syrup drives a rapid insulin response on top of a cortisol peak that is already elevating blood glucose through the morning surge. The fat content slows gastric emptying, prolonging the period during which the caffeine and sugar are being absorbed and their cardiovascular effects are being sustained. And the total caloric density of the drink, often between 300 and 500 calories, is rarely accounted for in the person's daily food intake, because it is a drink, not a meal, and drinks are culturally invisible in the way food is not. Research from psychosomatic medicine confirmed that caffeine consumed during the cortisol peak window, the first 90 minutes after waking, produced blood pressure responses significantly higher than the same dose consumed later in the day. The timing amplified the cardiovascular effect. And a large flavored coffee consumed at that moment is not simply delivering caffeine. It is delivering caffeine, sugar, and fat simultaneously into a cardiovascular system already running at its morning maximum. The replacement is not abstinence from coffee. The evidence on plain black coffee, or coffee with a small amount of milk and no added sugar consumed after the first 90 minutes of waking after a glass of water, is broadly positive for cognitive function and does not carry the cardiovascular risk signal of the flavored specialty drink. The caffeine, separated from the sugar load consumed after the cortisol peak in a modest quantity, is a different metabolic event. The drink is not the problem. The sugar, the dose, the timing, and the size of the problems. Let me bring all 5 together, because Clifford had all 5 every single day, while the soda he had given up 5 years earlier sat unbought in the supermarket as evidence of the health choices he was making. Fruit juice at breakfast, fructose driving hepatic triglyceride production and glucose spiking blood pressure before the morning had made his first demand. Flavored coffee mid-morning, caffeine plus sugar plus fat during the cortisol peak, compounding the morning cardiovascular surge. Energy drink at 2 in the afternoon, adenosine blockade, raising blood pressure acutely while cardiac electrophysiology was being disrupted by compound interactions. Commercial smoothie as a health intervention, concentrated fructose load, repeating the hepatic triglyceride cycle and driving uric acid-mediated endothelial dysfunction. And 2 to 3 glasses of red wine in the evening, raising blood pressure, elevating triglycerides, disrupting sleep architecture, and adding hepatic inflammatory burden that amplified every other metabolic consequence of the day. Not one of them was soda. Every one of them was doing measurable cardiovascular damage. And the total daily fructose and alcohol load that Clifford was delivering to his liver every single day was producing the triglycerides, the low HDL, the elevated blood pressure, the pre-diabetic HbA1c, and the coronary calcification that his cardiologist had found and that had brought him to me. Knowledge without action is just worry. I am not here to make you anxious. I am here to give you a plan. I call this the cardiovascular beverage protocol. 5 replacements starting today. Step 1. Replace fruit juice with the whole fruit and water. Keep a glass of water on the breakfast table. Eat 1 piece of whole fruit. The fiber is the cardiovascular protection that the juice removed. Step 2. Stop energy drinks completely. If afternoon fatigue is driving the habit, address the fatigue directly. A 15-minute walk at 2 in the afternoon activates the glucose transport mechanism in skeletal muscle and produces genuine energy without the cardiac electrophysiological cost. Hydration. A glass of water at 2 rather than a can addresses a common and underappreciated contributor to afternoon energy dips. Step 3. Replace commercial smoothies with the whole foods they were made from. A handful of berries, a small apple, those foods, eaten rather than drunk, deliver the same nutritional content with the fiber that changes everything about how the liver handles the sugars they contain. Step 4. Reduce alcohol meaningfully and do so specifically at the evening meal, not 1 glass less. A structural reduction. 3 evenings of non-drinking per week minimum. Red wine does not reduce cardiovascular risk in the dose and frequency pattern that most adults over 60 are consuming it. The triglycerides and the blood pressure tell the truth that the antioxidant story has been covering. Step 5. Move your morning coffee to 90 minutes after waking. Drink it plain or with a small amount of milk without flavored syrup and limit the size. 1 standard cup after water after the cortisol peak has begun to fall. That single timing change reduces the cardiovascular amplification of the caffeine effect more significantly than any change to the coffee itself. I want to come back to Clifford. 3 months after those 5 changes. No other medication adjustment. No dramatic dietary overhaul. His fasting triglycerides had fallen from 4.1 to 2.3 millimoles per liter. His HDL had risen from 0.9 to 1.1. His blood pressure was consistently below 138 for the first time in 2 years on the same 2 medications. His HbA1c at his next diabetic review was 5.8, back below the pre-diabetic threshold. His cardiologist described the metabolic improvement as meaningful and noted it in the context of no medication change. He came back to see me 4 months after those results. He sat across from me with the expression of a man who has made a genuine discovery that costs him something to acknowledge. He said, "I gave up soda and thought I had done the difficult." He paused, then he said, "I replaced it with 5 drinks that were doing more damage than what I gave up." He looked at me, and then he said the thing that has stayed with me ever since. He said, "The label said healthy. The blood panel said otherwise. I trusted the label. The label is not the mechanism. The blood panel is the mechanism. And now you know how to read what the panel is actually responding to." Which of these 5 drinks do you recognize in your daily routine? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And those answers tell me how many people are making the same substitution Clifford made, giving up the obvious thing and replacing it with 5 things the label protected from scrutiny. If this video gave you something that changes what is in your glass tomorrow morning, share it. Not for me. For the person in your life who gave up soda years ago and has been drinking fruit juice and evening wine ever since he cannot understand why their triglycerides will not come down. They may not know what their drinks are doing inside their cardiovascular system, but you do now, and that is exactly why you are here. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do. Every week I bring you honest, evidence-based information that I wish every one of my patients had access to long before they needed surgery. Take care of your heart. It has been working for you every single minute of every single day without asking for anything in return. Give it what it needs. It is a fair trade. One last thing, and this is important. Everything I have shared today is general medical information based on published research and my clinical experience as a cardiac surgeon. It is not a substitute for your personal medical care. Please do not make changes to your medications or your prescribed dietary plan without speaking to your own physician first. They know your history. They know your clinical picture. I do not. This is education. Use it as the beginning of that conversation,